Yeah, man.
ठीक है.
This is about fourth episode already.
Fourth.
Nice.
ठीक है. Let's
So
start.
I was, so I came across this technology / crate called Iroh, IROH, and so this is a very fascinating thing. Right? It's also one of the things that I feel like I've spent a lot of time in my lifetimes also. So in 2012-13 period, I built a product which I never couldn't launch. It was called Burstick. The idea was basically you install Burstick, I install Burstick, and we share with each other some sort of key, some sort of unique ID, and then in my Burstick I can go and configure some folders. So it's kind of like file sharing P2P, but individualized P2P, not like BitTorrent. And you might have heard of some P2P file sharing tools which are largely used for piracy. So obviously, whenever you have any file sharing or virtually any technology, you can use it for bad stuff. So, when to me, basically, the internet is pretty centralized, right? It's pretty problematic in the sense that obviously we depend on some company to provide, because the moment it is centralized, someone is paying the bill because all the traffic is going through them, and their service has to have high uptime. So even if not much traffic, there is at least much maintenance, right? To make sure they must be getting a lot of attacks, if nothing else. All sorts of bad actors like North Korea, China, whatever, right? So it's definitely a problem, and I feel like 2025 maybe we are still living in a very centralized internet. You can argue Web3 was a whole push towards trying to decentralize, but it didn't work, right? It was obviously mixed with a bunch of other concerns, which ultimately you can't have everything public. And the moment you have private bit crypto, it becomes some whatever. So what I did in Burstick was I used WebRTC, right? So at the time, Go had a package called, I don't remember, I think probably just called WebRTC, and it was a great purely just write a simple Go program. Normally WebRTC is used in browsers, but they gave us a WebRTC implementation in Go, and it was pretty decent. So the problem statement is obviously if you have two devices, how do they connect to each other, right? Without, we all know we see REST APIs, and the way we do web development or application development is always like some server, and then there's a client, right? We always have this simple architecture, right? And this simple architecture is centralized. So if you talk about P2P, it's tricky, right? To how do we get two people talk to each other without a central entity, and it's not a hard problem. The good thing about P2P is that it has been a solved problem, like BitTorrent, right? It's been there since 2000, probably, I don't know, 2004, 2005, or even sooner than that, right? And if not BitTorrent, there have been a lot of file sharing tools and a lot of different technology. You can even argue the way internet itself works is peer-to-peer at very fundamental level, right? Like the way there's a BGP. How does my computer know where Google ka server is, right? So there's when you ping, it goes through. But that is you can argue it's everything is a P2P problem ultimately. At most fundamental level, internet is P2P, but the abstraction that we give each other, like if you have to write some program, so we have decided on the IP base, you will create a server which will listen on some IP and on some port, and then you will open a connection to that. So to solve it, and one failure that I believe all these P2P technologies have was it's like, imagine you writing a web application where you are also writing, let's say, the Django equivalent of that web application, right? And also writing the TCP/IP equivalent of that web application. right? So we rely on layers that are provided by operating system, right? So the first layer is obviously the internet, right? The whole we just use TCP IP and it just magically works for us. Then we rely on, let's say, Django and any other HTTP, which kind of also magically works from our point of view. And then finally we write our API handlers. So, but when you look at P2P application, they don't have this clean stuff, right? If you want to write P2P application, you probably will be using some sort of, like I use WebRTC, right? And WebRTC is P2P, right? That's why I was like, okay, the moment because it was a thing that I could understand. Before WebRTC, I did not have a P2P thing in my hand that I can just like. There were always a lot of like you can always see the BitTorrent source code, but it was not a good library. It was not good solution, right? So anyways, and recently you in the I think the first conversation we discussed Tailscale. So Tailscale is built on top of something called WireGuard. So WireGuard is a open source Go thing, right? For and it does solve a lot of those problems that we need to solve and to create programs. But I feel like I really want to use. When I saw that, I wanted to use it. It was definitely slightly better than the state of art earlier, right? It does solve a lot of problems, but it is still extremely finicky. It's kind of does too many things. I would not say it does too many things, but getting WireGuard working is still, in my opinion, hard. I couldn't actually build an application where I was actually sending messages across, right? I read it and it was painful. And then these guys, what is called Tailscale, it works. You can do that. It is just the the developer experience is not great. But Tailscale proved, right, key to it's a brilliant technology. It has massive benefits. So Iroh is there's a team called Network Zero, weird name. They have been involved in all sorts of. If you look at any BitTorrent is obviously one example, but Bitcoin itself is another example of a decentralized. There is no central server of Bitcoin, right? So obviously these guys. So one of the problems that they have always had was there was no layer, right? This is my TCP or BSD socket layer that we program against, and this is my application code layer. So Iroh went ahead. So the team behind Iroh had built that layer multiple times for different Web3 projects, and I think they eventually realized that the core part of P2P should be abstracted out. So that's the brilliant thing that they had done. You can argue, like for example, earlier I said WireGuard is very close, but it kind of does little bit more. In fact, the name itself is little bit misnomer. It seems to be like guarding your wire, which is the TCP connection or any sort of network connection, which is not the point, because if you wanted to really guard a connection, you can always use SSL or TLS, right? So these technologies are there to have a simple interface for encryption over any unsecure network, right? So WireGuard is kind of misnomer. I was always put off. Like I didn't understand why I already have OpenSSL or so many SSL TLS implementations. So it actually is not that. The name itself is wrong, and also it does have a wrong notion of putting IP into the picture. So basically, WireGuard, the way it works is it kind of gives you a new IP address, and then you can. So their idea is, there are lots of applications already written which can deal with IPs, IP and port. As soon as you have an IP and port, your Django, everything just works. So that is a right, you can argue, effort or a right intention, trying to simplify the application code by mapping something which we are very familiar with, which is the TCP IP, with the P2P thing, which is very weird thing. There's just no notional or no agreed upon standard. But I believe that is wrong, because it just makes things too complex. Because, like creating a virtual network device, it's just too complex a thing for us to kind of really wrap our head around. And mapping it to giving an IP address, which is a legitimate IP address, which is available from that operating system to all processes, etc., etc. So that's it does too much work. Iroh does just, so what we really need is an ability for, let's say, for my laptop to connect to your laptop, right? That's P2P. If I can you run some program, I run some program on our respective laptops, and if we can just send something, I send a packet, it somehow is delivered to your machine, we have achieved P2P, right? And then afterwards, what we do with it, it's totally in our hands. So for you to do that, you need some. There are a few layers that we have, right? So we have. So what they have done brilliantly is, like, for example, WebRTC has this problem. Like we built a very WebRTC has an initial, how long does it take for connection to establish problem? Because you are gathering the IP address of your peer and trying each IP address and then you do a fallback. So it kind of has a, let's be optimistic or about I will somehow be able to directly contact you. So that works great if you are in the same LAN, etc. But if you are in a very far away machine, it's not the right one. And also WebRTC has been designed forever, since the beginning, for media applications, where throughput is high, right? You need to have a lot of like video, etc. can only be shared through WebRTC. So whereas what we need is, so WebRTC is not a great abstraction, right? Because one is too complex again, right? And second is, how do I say? So it wraps around an application level protocol. Okay, how do you send packet is decided by WebRTC. There are data channels and etc. So again, what we are saying is we need really simple things. Unix BSD socket, where you just open a socket and send a packet, and the other guy who's listening to on that socket is just receives that just simple thing is not there. So Iroh has kind of done that, and it opens a very sort of very interesting, like, for example, how does it work? Like, and especially if you ask from this angle specifically, what if, let's say, North Korea or some nation actor is against your startup? I think about that scenario. Will not startup, P2P virtually probably will. That's another thing about P2P. I believe that because there's no central player, the only thing that is there is the software, and software should be open source, right? That's how do I say? Because I mean, the only way to make money is either make the paid software. Because even if you make it the paid software, I can always reverse engineer the protocol. I can connect to that protocol. So you'll be making things very complex, right? The protocol has to be really complex and random. So I believe in this world, it's very, how do I say, a bit, at some level, you can argue it's hostile to commercial stuff, because, it's like all libertarian dream, right? We are all free talking to each other without needing governments and all those intermediaries, right? Like Google and Facebook are like, we are the biggest intermediary. If you want to talk to anyone else, you have to pay money to Google and Facebook, right? That's the business that they have. So that's maybe another reason why P2P doesn't work. And so this, like, I highly recommend people to really try out such news, because you never seen, it's a totally brand new paradigm, right? How do you do this? And Iroh has made it extremely accessible. You can see in less than like 100 lines of Rust code, I have written the client and the server in the same single 100-line Rust file. It's very readable. It's easily, you can have a session, and you're learning a brand new technology, right? Like, it's pretty interesting. Like, they actually have a way to use BitTorrent, right? So it's like we think of BitTorrent as a file sharing network, and it is definitely a file sharing network, but it is also a distributed hash table. So basically, you need to answer this question, that the magnet link, right? So earlier, the BitTorrent used to be a torrent file. And how do I find the torrent file? Somebody has to host the torrent file. And that used to be the servers that Pirate Bay and all of that, they used to shut down, and then they used to have random stuff. Now, of late, or rather since last 20 years, we have magnet links. So if you have a magnet link, there's no server to shut down it. Which server will you shut down? There's no server mentioned in the magnet. It's just an ID. Like, magnet link is literally just an ID. And that is what DHT is. By the way, distributed hash table is a very interesting topic for people to study and so on. But what it does is, in a very, very short, this thing is, it's a, like, it's a, how do I say, collective storage, right? So, like, for example, when I'm using BitTorrent, I am storing not only the files that I'm interested in, but also a subset of the DHT, the distributed hash tables. So I know that this file, like, for example, the key in the DHT that BitTorrent uses is the magnet link, which uniquely identifies the individual torrent, and the value is which peers have this file, right? That's what you're interested in. If you have the magnet link, if you know which all peers have it, you can just connect to them and you can ask them, right? So this is a very tiny information. So DHT kind of works well because you're storing other people's data, right? Like, so you have to have very good budget. I want to store thousands and thousands of people's data instead of just one person's GBs of data, right? So DHT is pretty interesting. And to answer that question, if you really want to set up infrastructure using Iroh, the way you do it is you piggyback on the BitTorrent mainline DHT something, right? If you want to Google mainline DHT, BitTorrent mainline DHT, and for that too, if you really want to attack it, you kind of have to attack that entire BitTorrent network route, which is, you can argue, because it's not just Iroh. The BitTorrent network is typically has 10 to 20 million connected peers at any time world over, more or less, throughout the whatever. So somebody, if they want to attack, there's not one server that they have to attack, right? They have to kind of attack 20 million servers, which is, you can imagine, it's just, and if you're doing that, all the bad guys who are using torrent for probably doing bad stuff, they will come after you. How are you shutting down my torrent network when my black money or whatever happens, etc. So I'm pretty sure a lot of Web3 projects must be using BitTorrent mainline DHT to bootstrap or to. So it's fascinating. It's like things you don't do, and it's very practical because what we are doing is we are actually adding all of this. So this is not just a random technology. This thing, we are adding support in Fastn for this whole thing. So when you run a server in Fastn, right? Fastn serve starts a HTTP server. I want to be able to start a server on my machine and give you a key or some sort of ID that you then do something on your machine. You also have to have Fastn installed, and your browser now will be able to talk to the HTTP server running on my machine, right? Without DNS or without any other stuff, right? So we started with how do we replace ngrok, right? So you must have heard, like, the developers have this standard problem, So Iroh itself can use BitTorrent DHT, BitTorrent mainline DHT. So BitTorrent, right? So DHT is only for me to discover you. So when you look at Iroh, it's point to point. So I need some information about you for me to connect with you. So that is a very tiny amount of centralization. And they support multiple ways to solve this problem. One way to solve this problem is have a central server only, right? Like, if all of us were connected to a server, you can create a server, and if I need to send something to you, that's how WebRTC works. So in WebRTC, there is always, obviously, you are on some website, WebRTC, a website thing. So that website is the central server, and you figure out how are you going to. So you extract this information. The information is basically what all IP addresses you have. You have multiple IP addresses because there's some IP address of your machine, then some router, and similarly on your side, there are some IP addresses, right? And from any pair of IP addresses, we may succeed to connect, right? So how do we exchange this set of IP addresses is not solved by WebRTC. WebRTC says, this is a packet, you have to somehow, through WebSocket or through any means, you have to communicate to the. So that's the initial connection bootstrapping problem, right? So when you're bootstrapping it, at that time you need something. Now what do we need? So you can have a central server, you can have DNS, which is also central server, central HTTP server, a central DNS server. These two are provided by Iroh. So because there's a very tiny amount of traffic that goes through it, so that you can actually literally use their servers, and they don't mind. They actually tell you, just feel free to use it. feel free to, all the software is open source, so you just run a number of such machines, and they have very little load because no real data is really traveling through them. This is just a packet, which is what all IP addresses we have. So that is, so if you have anything like a DNS or a centralized HTTP server, North Korea can kill you again, right? Because that would be one IP address to attack, or 200 IP addresses to attack. But DHT, the BitTorrent mainland DHT, for example, to kill that, you need to kill 20 million servers, which is impossible for anyone to do. So Iroh can, so that's where the DHT comes in. If you don't need, if for a lot of startups, for a lot of companies, you can use Iroh without DHT, because you're not looking at a use case where North Korea will really be attacking you. If you're just building a simple chat app, or building a simple whatever canvas, etc. For those cases, you can use the central guy for initial exchange, and then it will be really fast. And game, let's say if you're making a game, multiplayer game, if you're in the same house as me, we can have GBPS network, right? That initial setup would be taken care of by the. But this is actually, like you talked about Fastn plans, we are going to create probably the biggest social network out there. It is like very soon. It'll be like basically every Fastn application server that is running is a full-blown anything you want, right? Because you have a marketplace. So, for example, we have the updates app, right? So, which is mostly like a mini Twitter already, right? So, in our hands, we have a mini Twitter. Now, if I run that mini Twitter on Amitu.com, deploy it on even Fifty.com, North Korea can kill Fifty.com, right? They can just send their assassin and kill the DevOps, or they can whatever, right? So they can totally kill the data center that where the server might be, or they can just flood a huge amount of database. So how do I create a blog that I have that North Korea or any such cannot shut down? So actually, it's not hosted on Swift, right? As we are not actually particularly great. We are not. I mean, we don't know. Our site is barely somehow. Well, I'm not saying that we can take on attacks from those kind of people. So if I have to really, so that's how we are hoping. If you run Fastn on your machine, you can give me a key, and I can install Fastn, and I will have access to that when I try to access. So one of the problems, if you look at the internet technology, has become really complex because of, let's say, SSL. Right? If you want to do secure communication with each other, you need to have what is called certificate, which is another central entity. Right? So you need to get an IP address, which is itself a very tricky problem, right? You have to have, the only way to get IP address is to rent it from any of the cloud providers, or go to any of the network original guys who have IP blocks. Today, I think all the IP, you can find out how many IPv4 blocks are still not sold, but I think there are very few, and they would be obviously very expensive, and they would not sell it to you. First of all, you have to be a legitimate entity in India. Let's say if you are getting IP address in India, so then you have to talk to an Indian, whatever government, some sort of agency, or not government, but some bureaucratic process you have to go through, etc. So it's a pain. So these guys just take this unique key and make it almost as if your IP address. So that's the beautiful part, right? So the whole world is now suddenly freed from the IP address pain. And then if you want to securely contact, you need now either Let's Encrypt or any of the other SSL providers, which is a pain because internet is open by default, right? So which means if you're on a server somewhere and you have a port open, anyone can send a packet to that, and you will receive it, and you'll have to handle, and you may have to reject it, but it is open, right? So here, because if the key itself is a private key, so first of all, it might be open, but you cannot enumerate it, right? In IP address, there are only finite amount of IP addresses, some billion IP addresses. You can enumerate all of them, and you can just attack all of them. Here, I can create a key, and the thing is, I can go to the extent and I can create 10,000 keys for this laptop. So if you're attacking me, and I know who have I shared this key with, so I have a unique key just for you. So if I'm getting an incoming request from that corresponding that key, I know Saurabh is sending that traffic, so I can remove that, shut down that, and now it will so I can create a code totally like a attack resistant network, right? Obviously, I cannot exploit it commercially. Like that's the only negative is key. Any attempt to exploit it negative will kill it. It will fork the network. If it is success, there would be a network and it will fork it. If it is not successful, then obviously it's not successful. Nothing to talk about. So, but I do want to kind of do that, and I think so. I feel like P2P has kind of failed because as a technology, P2 has existed from I would say before 2000 till 25, right? So in 25 years, P2P technology exists. The fuck up is people combine everything into one. So for example, let's say if you look at a P2P chat app, right? Today only I was looking at some P2P mobile, Android, iPhone, they support all of these devices. The fuck up is they take care of the network, they take care of the UI, they take care of the backend logic. That application has everything. So that is not scalable because the fuck up is now that application has an identity. Let's say if I add you on that application, I get your identity. Somehow I can deliver a message to you, right? It's a chat app, obviously, when you share this. The fuck up is over that identity, I cannot do anything else. I cannot share my printer over that identity, right? I cannot say, okay, if Saurabh wants, click on this button and my printer, he should be able to print. Right? He'll not be able to access. Let's say if a server is running on my machine, I want Saurabh to be able to access that. Or I have a folder on my machine. I want Saurabh to be able to access that. Or I have a webcam, or I have any sort of stuff, right? So each of them, there's a separate application, right? So that would be as nonsensical as creating like a email address for every application that you're using, right? And authenticating for every application. Every application, P2P application, you have to create one more. Like, how do I know who you are? And most of the P2P apps are broadcast applications. So that doesn't really work, in my opinion. Because if we are sharing something, why am I sharing something public? Mostly, if I have anonymity and I'm sharing public, it is almost always some sort of criminal stuff or piracy. It's basically crime only, right? Think about the nature of that. So, but the moment you make it like, how do I say, what I'm sharing is only available to you, then I'm not going to share a movie with you, right? Maybe I can, but you're not going to. I mean, how many movies can I have? Right? You're not going to say, oh, I need a movie. Where do I get it? I'll get it from Amitu. Like, how many movies can? Even if I really was using it for piracy, and if you have to really go to each friend one by one, or if you create your own, okay, I will only pirate from my friends, right? You'll not get the movie, right? The movie, if you really want to pirate, you have to go to BitTorrent. They have all the movies. So that's what I'm saying. So the moment you have a P2P, but not open P2P, but a closed P2P, where things that I'm sharing are only available to my people, and that's what I need, right? So I want P2P Fastn because Fastn is HTTP service, right? And behind HTTP service, you can have anything. You can have a file server, you can have a HTTP server. Basically, through HTTP, you can build anything. And if I can remove the whole SSL and IP address and hosting, etc., from HTTP, which this does, then you're looking at a totally new kind of internet. I don't know. It'll be very cool to see.
So I wanted to talk about influence. Okay. I think something we often hear in the context of leadership, even in behavioral interview questions. Okay. So what is influence? Okay. I think influence is the ability to basically shape thoughts, right, behavior and decisions, right? And it's not about persuasion, right? It's about, let's say, earning trust and creating a vision, right? It's a core aspect of leadership, right? So that is influence, right? And now I had this thought last year, where I was thinking about like how is influence built. Okay. So I may have oversimplified it, but I believe influence is built on three basically key things. Okay. So one is basically credibility. Okay. Basically your actions and your work defines you, right? And being consistent and reliable is important here, right? Second is dealing with people. Okay. How you treat people, help them basically resolve conflicts, right? And here I think being selfless is the key. Okay. And the third point is basically standing for something. Okay. I think important thing here is courage. Okay. Courage is to stand for things you believe in, right? Right or wrong is subjective, right? And again, if people believe in the cause, they would start standing beside you, right?
Like the first one was credibility, right? It's like,
Yeah.
so if you're really a startup. So you take into three contexts. One is an individual person as a potentially person who is looking for a job and a career, who is on the career track, right? Like you want to have a strong professional career. So your first point was credibility, right? Who you are, what have you done in the past. I strongly believe a lot of people are actually lacking that, right? They jump, like you go from job A to job B and you get a tiny bit of whatever bump and you feel like, I'm doing a smart play. But you're right, absolutely right, because it's very transparent. It's so I was getting this. If you look at it, a lot of people are again a bit career minded and short term focused, right? They're like, like I will worry about people when I'm manager, or they are my like people. They are reporting to me, or I am reporting to them. It's a very narrow minded. I've seen lots of developers who are largely interested in people from the point of view only. Okay, let's make a plan to go for a movie or something like that, right? And when it comes to people, they are largely believe that this person is not reporting to me. I'm not their peer or whatever, assigned peer or whatever. I'm helping them because it's kind of required from my JD perspective, right? As part of my job, and I believe that's very distinct, right? You're missing on that by, and you can combine the two, right? If you're generally helping out and combine the first part, which is, how do I say, you're consistently doing it. Increase your credibility. Like every time a person has a Rust problem, I'm there to help them, right? I've done that. So that's. I'm just trying to say like, these things can be converted to a career. Like you can analyze them from the career perspective, even from a startup perspective. We can take a look at both of them.
But I think for the second point, like for example, when you're helping people or whatever you do, right, however you're treating them, you have to be selfless. Okay, मतलब
Exactly.
if you are being selfish, like for example, if there is some sort of self-interest, right, then probably it won't work out. Okay, you'll have to be selfless. Okay,
Right. And the third one
standing
was
for something,
bravery.
courage.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, standing for something what you believe in. Basically,
Exactly.
yeah.
And this is also, I totally like, for example, it doesn't necessarily even have to be key, it's like a cause. A wrong interpretation of that could be key, it's a cause. I'm saying Sachin Tendulkar stood for becoming the greatest cricketer in the world, right? It's not like he was trying to make the world a better place. I'm just saying, like figuring out this is who you are at very fundamental level, figuring out who you are. If you go from, okay, I'm doing this job in this industry and in that industry, or if you have that kind of like, okay, right now this trend is AI is the thing, and I'm going to become like a AI startup. Like, you don't have spine, you don't have that courage. I don't know what it is, like what conviction, right? You have to, and that what I liking is if you really think about it, they all circle back on each other. Like for example, you cannot be consistent about any single thing unless it's like, for example, bus tech, right? I was like thinking about this problem in 2012. I was thinking about similar problem way back. In IIT Bombay, I ran one of the most popular FTP servers. It's not something that I just picked up, right? I feel like this is a problem to solve, and I created tools. Like for example, there was a problem. Like at that time, everyone has FTP server in the IIT, or everyone was able to, and that's how we were solving file sharing. And it was to me much bigger than file sharing. It's how much piracy you can do. You want to share address book, you want to share your email. It's so much. So that's so if you have something that you are like, okay, I'm going to pursue this particular thing for lifelong thing, then that's the only way you can be consistent. Otherwise, 5 years, 10 years down the line, you'll be doing something else.
Correct.
And if you're doing something else, it's almost rebooting your career. Obviously, you have gained some credibility by being part of big companies, let's say maybe, but I don't believe that's still the long-term vision. Like if you think about Steve Jobs, right? He's not like he went to 10 companies. He didn't give a shit, right? Like he was like, okay, this is what I want to build. I believe this is a real success. If you look at any Shah Rukh Khan, any real stalwart or any big success in any field, they're not like I'm an influential person. I'm like not influential. Sorry, I'm not like a career-wise. Like have good resume. I'm saying it's not resume building. It's a call. It's a thing that you decided. I'm going to devote my life to, and that's the only way you can be
Consistent.
20-year consistent. Exactly.
Yeah.
And same thing with people, because if you have that, let's say for example, I'm pretty sure Sachin Tendulkar must have been the best person to learn from, because then you're think about the Vinod Kumble, whatever, his friend, right? Like his lifelong friend, and exactly, and that's what happens, because when you're at that level, when you're like, okay, look at actors, do you think they must be doing professional networking stuff by being, but ultimately there must be friends also, right? That's what I'm saying. So then career becomes your friendship. Like your friendship is that you are the people that you're with, you're helping them. You're not helping them because this is your job and these are your managers. That's a very shallow relationship. When you are like, okay, when you're in for life, there would be 10 other people in for life in something similar to that. Right? So if you're a cricketer, that would be other cricketer buddies. If you're a dancer, it will be dancer people. If you're doing startup, it's like, you think about it, I have my whole startup friend circle just doing similar stuff. I don't know what startup, but it is startup friends circle, right? So, and that's what I'm about. Like I did my first startup inside IIT, and so forth, right? So I totally agree with I mean, I was wondering why influence is important, and I never thought about that. I was doing, or I never bothered about influence. Like, am I an influential person, or how to be influential? I don't know. I never thought that's something I have to do, but you're right. That's everyone is doing that. They don't have actually a choice.
One thing was कि how is leadership basically related to influence, ठीक है?
Yeah.
So so मतलब this is a very common thing, like leadership requires influence, right? But why? ठीक है? Because मतलब leaders drive progress, right? And progress depends on alignment, not on authority, basically, right? So that's why basically influence is important for leadership. And so does that mean having influence means you are a leader? Not necessarily, basically, right? Because matlab, being influential means matlab, you can be, let's say for example, a mentor, an expert, let's say an architect, right? But you need not be a leader there, right? And leadership requires both things, influence plus responsibility, okay? So yeah, I think that.
So actually, there is I had this line: if you want to be de jure CXO, you have to be de facto CXO. So de jure means by law, right? Like de jure, whatever. Meaning that you like, for example, who is the CTO of Google is you can't just decide I am the CTO of the Google, right? Like there's an actual person who is the CTO of the company, or any job that you look at, right? So that's the de jure position. Everyone has a de jure position, right? You know what company you work for and what is your title, etc. These are de jure, right? So if you want to be de jure CXO of a company, let's say, you have to become the de facto CXO of that company. So de facto is like, I don't care if I am the CTO of the Google, right? Like I can just start acting like the CTO of the Google, right? And acting doesn't necessarily mean okay, I have authority to do something. It simply means that I'm writing think pieces, I'm creating a plan. Especially inside a company, if you are inside a company, you can start right, coming up with figuring out what does that CXO does. And let's say if that guy is looking at hiring plan, creating hiring plan, you create your own hiring plan. Sure, nobody will listen to you. Sure. But if your hiring plan is actually similar or better than the hiring plan of an actual CXO, your CEO might notice that, right? Like, what the fuck happened, right? Like this random guy, you just made it, right? And obviously do it smartly. That's the whole point of that. To be DJ or CXO, you have to be de facto. To become de facto CXO, that's how you grow, right? Like if you think about promotion, you can argue, okay, I'm not going to work harder because at this level, this is what I'm going to do. But then why somebody else will work harder? And for a while, you can say there's oh my god, this guy is getting paid less, but he's working harder. But when everybody sees that this person is actually helping me more, this person is helping solve more bugs, whatever, right? Howsoever, whatever is the work criteria, right? Then your salary will automatically, it will, because everyone around you is kind of agreeing with that, right? So you don't have to. So
basically they say, right,
leadership is,
if you perform at the next role, you'll get the promotion.
Yeah.
So,
and people say that you should wear the dress for the not for the job that you have, but for the job you want. And don't take dress as just purely as dress. Dress like be that person, right? Like talk like that person, right? Like have skills like that person, etc. Then you will get the next person. Maybe not in the same company, but in another company, quite likely.
ठीक है, cool अमित, ठीक है, thanks, bye.